So Anna, on this second part of the interview, let's understand the differences between being an interpreter in Europe versus in Asia. So what are the major differences that you have encountered with your experience in Europe, like in Spain and in Geneva, and then working in Asia?
Okay, so let me start with a few caveats though, because you can't say an interpreter in Europe or an interpreter in Asia. You're defined by the place where you work, and also, and very importantly, by your language combination, so the languages that you speak. So I can tell you the differences between what it was for me working in Geneva in the UN institutions mainly, and working in Asia with Western languages. I work with English, French, Spanish, and Italian. So I don't speak any of the regional languages, and the situation for colleagues in the local market speak English, Chinese, or Japanese, English, or Korean. It's entirely different from my experience. But definitely, I think that the main difference is that in Geneva, you're within that ecosystem of the UN. And of course, you see different topics because you see health and labor issues and telecom, and then you'll see IP and trade and I'm starting to talk, and you see there are tons of topics that come. But when you've done that for 10 years, you've covered them all. So you more or less, it's always the same topics that come back. Whereas moving to Asia for me, it meant a lot more traveling. I'm based in Singapore, but I rarely work in Singapore. I cover from here the whole Asia and Oceania, as well as I go to Australia once in a while and New Zealand. I've even been to Vanuatu. But yeah, definitely China, Korea, Japan, those are big conference hubs. And you get some of the UN meetings that come here, and that stays more or less the same. But then there's also other kinds of meetings, more business oriented. You have also you have banks that have an annual meeting, or you have you also have events, the Olympic Games or World Rugby. You have the big basketball. I was in China for the World Cup where we won. that was pretty amazing. Yeah. But then you also do things. I've done IMF in Bali, or and then you do all the smaller meetings, like the commercial meetings we've been talking about. And I think the key is that, other than the traveling, there's a lot of traveling and a lot of logistics involved. I think the main difference is that here you have to be very agile and efficient in your preparation. So for me, in any given month, I can do health of the mother and the child, and then 2 days later, I'll be covering a specific trade agreement with an NDA. Then I'll be doing an arbitration hearing on some kind of building company, let's say. And then tomorrow I'll be doing emergency and climate change. And then 2 days later, you can be doing green bonds. And then you truly have to become an expert in all those topics, which means that you need to be curious, and then you have to be very thorough in your preparation. You have to be extremely efficient. Of course, you're building up. It's not that you're starting from scratch every time. What from climate change might be transferable to what's happened in health, or what you know about green bonds, and then that'd be helpful for the IMF conversations for sure. So there are certain topics that are, but still, you need to become an expert. You're going to be the voice of the experts, so you need to sound like one.
And in such short period of time, yes. You have to adjust.
Yes. So we've become, I thought everybody was like that. To me, it came as a shock to realize that no, people do not become experts in 3 days.
No.
It's like, why do they keep asking for experts and this and that? I can be an expert tomorrow. Just give me 3 days. So I think that's the main difference for me, for European languages in my context.
Wow, such interesting idea and information. And what, Anna, has been the major event that you have participated in while working in Asia?
Well, I've already given you a few. I think I'm gonna say that my favorite.
You
so
don't
far,
want to show off, but they're so interesting to
my favorite so far was the Olympic Games in Tokyo. I have to say, it came after a long period of, during a long period of pandemic. We didn't even know if it was actually going to happen. Until the last moment, we didn't know. We didn't have the tickets. We didn't know anything, and it was weird. It was hard. It was very intense. But at the same time, we all had the feeling that we were creating something, that it was magical what we were doing, and everybody was bored at home, and we knew that everybody was watching. And then being there, being the voice of those athletes who had been through hell. Some of them hadn't seen their families for years or for months because they had to be in quarantine before going to Japan. I mean, I think it was the most rewarding, I don't know, and challenging, and it was an amazing opportunity to be there. That's because I'm in Asia, otherwise wouldn't have the. For me, it was definitely a privilege to be there. And I understand that other sports diplomacy might be considered not the top of the when you talk about Davos or the G8, that sounds like fancier. But I think it was such a historical moment.
Yes, and I think for the audience it was a breath of fresh air.
Yes.
In the middle of the whole chaos.
Yes.
And I guess for you it was
for everybody.
Experience.
We were there, the journalists and the interpreters were like, the IOC people were like, oh, we're here! We're in Tokyo! We made it! Like, yay! Colleagues that you hadn't seen for years. We could tell that there was this excitement in the air, and we were all really fighting to make the most of it. And it was complicated, and then it was also, from an interpreting point of view, was a real breakthrough because we're working entirely remote from fantastic facilities, and there were people who thought it wasn't going to work, but it did. It worked wonderfully, and it was just like every day. It was like being little kids. We were like, whoa, like we were rediscovering. It was really, I think, that was one of the experiences that I'll take with me forever. And then you also bond because we were quarantined, and friendships and a amazing professional experience. Definitely, I think that's my favorite.
I definitely pay off. And finally, I think it's really important for all the Singaporean companies and the Spanish companies to understand the importance of having a good interpreter and for hiring their services. So what any last words for them to encourage them to not only hire you, but to value all the work of an interpreter?
Thank you so much for this question.
No, of course.
I always find it surprising that people go through all the lengths of preparing an international meeting. You're a business and you find your counterpart at the other side of the world, and you have months of email exchanges. You finally set the agenda, you find the venue, buy the tickets. Everything's so complicated, and you're negotiating through emails, and then you think you're almost there, and then when you're almost there, some people do not understand that. I mean, they're willing to leave the responsibility of the last word to someone who's not qualified, or just to think they can do it without. You wouldn't dream of drafting a commercial agreement without a lawyer in there. For some reason, they don't seem to understand that hiring an interpreter is an added value, and it's definitely an investment and not an expenditure. You're part of the team. You're the voice of that company. You're going to be putting words to the ideas that are going to make or break the deal. And having someone who's qualified there gives you all the chances. Why would you ruin it at the very last minute and just like throw a coin and see, it might work? When you have a professional interpreter on your side, that person is not just going to say what you're saying, it's just going to say right for that context, which is why you need an interpreter, because you're not able to do it yourself. I don't like. I have a hard time understanding that people do not get that. I think we're out of value.
Exactly. I think you're the one. If you cannot kind of communicate your ideas, you need someone that kind of makes you shine.
Of course, and then we're there not to be seen, to make you look good.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how is like having the right, like you will polish your shoes, be dressed properly, you make sure that your client is comfortable, and then you have someone who's not professional talking to your client that you're trying to conquer. How does that work?
Yes.
I don't know. It's hard to understand that people need convincing for that.
Yes, and I think they also need to understand that interpreters are part of your team.
Mm.
They're not an outside tool.
Definitely. When you walk into a room with an interpreter, your counterpart doesn't know that you hire that person for that day. It's not just the interpreter. It's someone who's part of your team. It's part of your company. It's part of your brand. It's your image. It's also part of your PR. You want to have someone there that you're proud of. You want to have that person in your team. Were you really taking chances? I don't understand. You know, when there are millions on the table or hundreds of thousands, and again, you know, we have all that knowledge that can also be useful.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Ana, for all your insights. And I think now people can consider an interpreter as an added value.
I hope so.
Yes, please do. So thank you so much for being here in the Spanish Sling.
Thank you, it's a pleasure.
Yes, so please come back soon. And see you next time in the Spanish Sling.
Bye.